Hello, welcome to the world of stories. Here, each video is a journey full of emotion, mystery, and unforgettable adventures. Thank you for clicking to watch and embarking with us on another captivating narrative. If you like stories that hold your attention and touch the heart, don't forget to like.
Ethan Prescott glanced at the darkening sky as the first drops of rain spattered against the windshield of his black Bentley. The weather in Seattle had always been unpredictable, but tonight, it felt different, charged with an energy that made the hair on his neck prickle. He adjusted his cufflinks, engraved with the initials EP, a subtle reminder of the life he had meticulously built from scratch. A life of power, prestige, and relentless ambition. The downtown streets were nearly deserted, with only the occasional pair of headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. Ethan had just left a lavish charity gala at the Washington Grand Hotel, where champagne flowed as easily as the well-rehearsed laughter of the elite. But as he turned down a quieter road, something unexpected caught his eye. A small figure huddled on the sidewalk, soaked to the bone, barely illuminated by the glow of a flickering street lamp. Ethan slowed the car, squinting through the rain-drenched window. It was a child, a boy no older than 8, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and a look of sheer despair on his face. "Damn it," Ethan muttered under his breath. He was not the type to intervene in such situations. Charity was fine for galas and press conferences, but in the real world, his first instinct was always to protect himself and his interests. Yet something about the boy's haunted expression stirred a rare flicker of empathy in him. He pulled over, the tires splashing water onto the curb. The car's headlights cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement as Ethan stepped out, immediately assaulted by the cold, driving rain. The boy flinched when Ethan approached, his eyes wide with terror. "Hey kid, it's okay," Ethan said, his voice surprisingly gentle against the storm's roar. "What are you doing out here by yourself?" The boy stared at him, shivering so hard that his small frame quaked. For a moment, Ethan thought he might bolt into the darkness. Instead, the child's lips parted, and he whispered something so faint that Ethan had to lean in, water streaming down his face. "Please, help. They're watching." The cryptic words made Ethan freeze. A sudden chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the rain. He glanced around, but the street was deserted, the buildings looming with the quiet indifference of a city used to ignoring its own shadows. "Who's watching?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he reached out a trembling hand and clutched Ethan's sleeve. The small fingers were icy, and Ethan felt an unexpected pang of protectiveness. "Come on, let's get you out of this rain." He gently guided the boy to the car and bundled him into the passenger seat, turning up the heat. As they pulled away from the curb, Ethan stole a glance at the boy, who sat silently with his gaze fixed out the window. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes, but there was something else there too, a look of foreboding that Ethan couldn't shake. Back at the Prescott estate, the storm lashed at the tall windows with a ferocity that made them rattle in their frames. The sprawling mansion was a fortress of steel and glass perched on a hill that overlooked the city, its lights blinking defiantly in the tempest. Ethan led the boy into the living room, where the warm glow from the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the sleek, modern decor. The boy hesitated at the threshold, his bare feet leaving wet prints on the polished wood floor. "It's all right. You're safe here," Ethan said, attempting a smile. He reached for his phone, intending to call someone, anyone, to handle this. The police? Child services? But before he could dial, the boy spoke again, his voice clearer this time. "My name is Liam." Ethan paused, phone in hand. The name tugged at something deep in his memory, a vague sense of familiarity he couldn't place. He shook his head, dismissing it as a coincidence. "Okay, Liam. Do you have any parents or family I can call?" Ethan asked, setting the phone down. Liam's face darkened and he looked at the floor. "They're gone. Taken." "Taken? By who?" The boy's eyes met Ethan's, and for the first time, Ethan saw the depth of fear in them. "People who know about you." The words hung in the air, suffocating in their implication. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline spike through him, the instinctual fight-or-flight response he hadn't experienced since his early days in business, clawing his way up through ruthless deals and veiled threats. "What do you mean, kid?" Ethan's voice dropped, tinged with an edge that made Liam shrink back slightly. But then the boy's eyes hardened, and he reached for the small leather pouch tied around his neck. He opened it and pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. "It's all here," Liam whispered, handing it to Ethan. Ethan took the paper with a slight tremble in his hand and unfolded it carefully. What he read made his heart pound in his chest. It was a fragment of a document, dated nearly a decade ago, bearing the logo of Prescott Industries and mentioning a Project Nightfall. A name Ethan had buried along with the past it represented. "No," he whispered, the blood draining from his face. The project had been shelved, its records sealed, and anyone with knowledge of it had been paid handsomely to forget. It was the kind of decision made behind locked doors, with nods and handshakes that couldn't be taken back. "Where did you get this?" Ethan's voice rose, the calm mask he wore so often starting to crack. Liam backed away a step, but his eyes remained locked on Ethan's, steady and defiant despite the fear. "My dad kept it. He said it was the only way to stay safe." The boy's voice was barely a whisper now, each word weighted with a meaning that pulled at the fabric of Ethan's controlled world. Ethan's mind raced, connecting fragments of memories and whispers, the vague suspicions he had dismissed, the sudden disappearances of former colleagues. He had always assumed that those were just casualties of the cutthroat nature of business. Now, the pieces began to form a picture more sinister than he dared to admit. A sharp knock at the front door made both of them jump. Ethan turned his head, the sound echoing through the quiet tension of the room. The knock came again, louder this time. "Stay here," he told Liam, moving to the console table where he kept a small handgun locked in a drawer. He didn't normally use it, but tonight felt different. With a flick of the safety, he walked to the door, nerves stretched taut. He opened it to find a tall man in a black suit, drenched and smiling without warmth. "Mr. Prescott," the man said smoothly. "We need to talk about your guest." And in that moment, Ethan knew that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had just entered his life. Ethan's pulse quickened as he stood face to face with the stranger on his doorstep. The man's sharp, dark eyes glinted in the dim light, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. The rain streamed down his tailored suit, but he seemed unfazed, like a statue carved from stone. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice controlled but tight. His grip on the gun behind the door tightened. "Names don't matter, Mr. Prescott. What matters is that you have something that doesn't belong to you," the man said, a cold, casual menace in his tone. His eyes darted past Ethan, searching for any sign of the boy. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan lied smoothly, blocking the man's view of the interior. He could feel the weight of the gun pressing against his palm, but the years of boardroom battles had taught him that first moves were often the most dangerous. The man raised an eyebrow as if impressed by Ethan's composure. "We both know that's not true. Hand over the boy and we can pretend this never happened." Ethan's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to shut the door, lock every bolt and call the authorities. But there was something about the man's calm certainty, the way he stood as if he already owned the place, that suggested the police wouldn't make a difference. "Sorry, but you'll have to leave now," Ethan said, pushing the door to close it. The man's hand shot out, stopping the door with surprising force. "Mr. Prescott, you're already in deep enough. Don't make it worse." His eyes flickered, a silent promise of consequences. Before Ethan could respond, a noise behind him made him glance over his shoulder. Liam stood in the hallway, eyes wide with terror, the small leather pouch still clenched in his hand. The stranger's gaze locked onto the boy and a twisted smile spread across his face. "There you are." In a heartbeat, Ethan slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. He could hear the man cursing on the other side, followed by a pounding that echoed through the entrance hall. Adrenaline surged and Ethan grabbed Liam, pulling him toward the stairs. "Upstairs. Now," he commanded, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. The boy didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled up the stairs, his small feet thudding softly on the carpeted steps. Ethan followed, his mind racing through plans and counterplans, each one more futile than the last. Once they reached the study on the second floor, Ethan locked the door and turned to Liam. The room, filled with shelves of books and antique maps, felt as though it were closing in around them. Rain lashed the tall windows, the wind howling like a living thing. "Who was that?" Ethan demanded, his voice lower but no less urgent. He needed answers and he needed them fast. They work for the people who took my parents, Liam said, his voice small but steady. He sat on the edge of an armchair, his thin frame dwarfed by the plush, leather upholstery. They want what my dad hid. Project Nightfall, Ethan said, more to himself than to Liam. The name, once consigned to the dark corners of his memory, now seemed to resonate through the room, filling the silence. It had been the beginning of everything, the rise of Prescott Industries, the fortune, the power. And it had been buried so deeply that Ethan had almost convinced himself it was just a bad dream. Do you even know what it is? Ethan asked, softer this time. Liam nodded, meeting Ethan's gaze with a maturity that seemed out of place for someone so young. My dad said it was a project that hurt a lot of people. He said they did things to make money and you knew. The accusation stung even though it was barely more than a whisper. Ethan's throat tightened as flashes of memory surfaced. Hushed meetings in dimly lit boardrooms, contracts signed with knowing glances, the silence of those who benefited too much to question anything. Nightfall had been a joint venture, an innovation in technology that promised a leap in data surveillance. What no one but a select few knew was that it had spiraled into something much more insidious, a tool for power and control. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face, the weight of the past pressing down on him. He looked at Liam, this child who had somehow been caught in the gears of a machine too powerful and too ruthless. I can't fix what happened back then, but I'll make sure you're safe, he said, the words surprising even himself. Before Liam could respond, the pounding on the front door below ceased. The silence was deafening, more threatening than the noise had been. Ethan moved to the window and peered out, but the driveway was empty. The rain blurred the city lights beyond, turning everything into a shifting mosaic of shadow and neon. They won't stop, Liam said quietly as if sensing Ethan's thoughts. My dad always said they'd come back one day. Ethan turned back to Liam, determination hardening in his chest. Then we won't be here when they do. An hour later, Ethan navigated the car down a twisting road that led out of the city, glancing in the rearview mirror every few moments. Liam sat silently beside him, wrapped in a blanket Ethan had hastily grabbed from the study. The weight of the document in his jacket pocket felt like a ticking bomb. The logo of Prescott Industries mocked him every time he touched it. Where are we going? Liam finally asked, his voice cutting through the drumming rain on the roof. To someone who can help us, Ethan replied. He thought of an old contact, a former journalist turned whistleblower, who had disappeared from the public eye years ago. She had been one of the few people brave enough to dig into the underbelly of corporate America and live to tell about it. If anyone could help them navigate this storm, it was her. The road wound through the dark woods, the headlights slicing through the sheets of rain. But as they drove further into the night, Ethan felt the tension mount with each passing mile. Somewhere out there, the man in the black suit was regrouping, plotting, and the forces that Ethan had once commanded now turned against him. He was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. For the first time in years, Ethan Prescott knew what it was to be truly afraid. And for Liam's sake, he had no choice but to face it. The night pressed in around them as Ethan steered the car further into the darkness, the rhythmic thrum of rain on the roof creating a relentless, uneasy soundtrack. The headlights cut through the storm, illuminating only fleeting glimpses of the road and the dense forest that lined it. The city of Seattle, with all its lights and towering skyscrapers, had disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the mist and rain. Liam sat silently beside him, the blanket pulled tightly around his small frame. His eyes, wide and watchful, darted nervously at every shadow that crossed their path. Ethan glanced at the boy, a pang of guilt and protectiveness washing over him. This child had been thrust into the aftermath of his decisions, a pawn in a dangerous game Ethan himself had set into motion long before Liam was even born. The dashboard glowed dimly as Ethan checked his phone, fingers tapping to find the number of Lillian Hart, the journalist who had once almost exposed Project Nightfall. He hadn't spoken to her in years, not since she left Seattle amid death threats and a scandal orchestrated by Prescott Industries' shadowy allies. If anyone could help them now, it was her. A deep breath steadied him before he made the call. The line rang 3 times before a wary, clipped voice answered. "This is Lillian." "It's Ethan Prescott," he said, pausing for a moment to listen for the sound of her hanging up. Instead, there was only silence. "I didn't think you'd have the nerve," she finally said, her tone laced with bitter irony. "There's no time for that. I need your help. It's about Project Nightfall." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Where are you?" Ethan gave her their rough location, the name of an old diner on a lonely highway that he knew would be deserted at this hour. The kind of place where memories gathered dust and secrets could be shared away from prying eyes. Be there in 30 minutes. And Ethan? Yes. If you're lying, you're dead. The line went dead, leaving only the static crackle and the storm outside. Ethan shoved the phone into his pocket, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He could feel Liam's eyes on him, filled with questions that neither of them dared to ask aloud. The neon sign of the Silver Owl Diner flickered in the downpour, casting strange, stuttering shadows across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Ethan parked near the entrance, scanning the area for anything unusual. Satisfied, he motioned for Liam to follow him out of the car. The boy hesitated but obeyed, clutching the blanket as they dashed inside. The diner smelled of old coffee and fried food, the yellowed linoleum floor creaking under their wet shoes. It was empty, save for an elderly waitress who glanced up with tired eyes and nodded absently. Ethan led Liam to a booth at the back, positioning himself so he could see the door. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The rain hammered against the windows and Ethan's nerves coiled tighter with each sound from outside. When the door finally opened, a gust of wind swept in, followed by a tall woman in a long trench coat. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, clung to her face, and her green eyes were sharp and unforgiving as they settled on Ethan. Lillian Hart hadn't lost her edge. "Prescott," she said, sliding into the booth across from him without preamble. Her eyes shifted to Liam, who shrank under her scrutiny. "Who's the kid?" "His name is Liam. He's the reason we're here," Ethan said, keeping his voice low. "And the reason we need your help." Lillian's gaze softened just a fraction as she took in the boy's pale, frightened face. "What's going on?" Ethan pulled out the yellow document and handed it to her. She scanned it quickly, her eyes widening as she read. "I thought I'd seen everything," she muttered, glancing up at Ethan. "This was buried deep, Prescott. How did you get it?" Liam spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "My dad kept it. He said it was the only way to keep us safe." Lillian's eyes darkened with recognition. "Your father, Michael Thorne? He was the analyst who vanished after the whistleblower hearings?" Ethan nodded, a heaviness settling in his chest. He knew too much and now Liam's caught in the crossfire. "They came for him tonight at my house." A shadow passed over Lillian's face as she processed the implications. "If they know you have this, we don't have much time. They'll be coming and they'll be prepared. Then tell me how to fight them," Ethan said, leaning forward. The urgency in his voice broke through his controlled facade. "I can't let them take him." Lillian sighed, the weight of years of battles lost and won reflected in her eyes. Project Nightfall was more than just a failed initiative, Ethan. It was a weapon disguised as innovation. They used it to control, blackmail, silence. If you want to stop them, you need to expose everything. And how do we do that without getting killed? Ethan's question lingered in the air like a challenge. A sudden thud at the back of the diner cut through the tense silence. Lillian's head snapped up, her eyes darting to the rear exit. Ethan followed her gaze, heart pounding. The shadows shifted, and for a brief moment, a silhouette appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, unmoving. Then the outline moved away, dissolving into the darkness. "They're here," Lillian said, her voice tight. She reached under her coat and produced a small, compact handgun, setting it on the table within easy reach. "We need to move. Now." Ethan grabbed Liam's hand, his pulse racing. He glanced back at the waitress, who had retreated to the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing inside the diner. "Where do we go?" Liam asked, fear making his voice tremble. Lillian's eyes locked with Ethan's, determination sparking in their depths. "We go underground. I know a place where we can regroup, but it won't be safe for long." As they slipped out the side entrance, the rain swallowed them, cold and relentless. And somewhere in the distance, a shadow watched, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The narrow alley behind the Silver Owl Diner was a maze of shadows, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning. Ethan's heart thumped like a war drum as they pushed through the rain, his hand clamped tightly around Liam's. Lillian led the way, her trench coat billowing behind her as they navigated the slippery pavement. The dark outline of buildings crowded in on either side, their jagged edges forming a grim tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever. "Where are we going?" Ethan shouted over the roar of the storm. "An old safe house," Lillian replied without turning. "It was set up by a group of journalists and whistleblowers. No one knows it still exists, not even your friends in high places." Ethan didn't like the way she said friends, as if it were an accusation. But he didn't argue. They had no time for old grudges or doubts. Behind them, the diner's neon sign sputtered and went dark, swallowed by the storm as if marking the moment they disappeared into the underworld. The safe house was hidden beneath an abandoned auto garage, a relic of the city's industrial past. Lillian led them through a rusted door that creaked ominously before descending a set of narrow, dimly lit stairs. The faint smell of oil and dust clung to the air, a testament to how long it had been since anyone had set foot there. Ethan's eyes adjusted to the gloom, revealing a space cluttered with old office furniture, faded maps, and stacks of documents. A single bulb hanging from a frayed wire cast a sickly yellow light over the room. Lillian dropped her soaked coat onto a chair and immediately began rummaging through a battered filing cabinet. "This place," Ethan began, taking in the grim surroundings. The past 24 hours had shifted his world so completely that he barely recognized himself. A powerful CO, a man who once wielded influence with a flick of his pen, now stood in an underground bunker fighting for a child he barely knew but had sworn to protect. Liam hovered near the entrance, his eyes wide as he took in their hideout. The boy's presence pulled Ethan back to the moment. They needed to focus on survival and answers, not reflections on how far he had fallen. "Here?" Lillian pulled out a thick folder, its edges frayed and corners stained with coffee. She spread the contents across a rickety table. Photographs, classified documents, memos with Prescott Industries logo stamped at the top. Ethan's heart sank as he saw the proof of the legacy he tried so hard to forget. Project Nightfall was originally pitched as a data integration system, Lillian said, her voice cold and steady. But it didn't stop there. Your board expanded it into a full-scale surveillance and manipulation tool, feeding secrets to politicians and corporations. The lives it touched were expendable. Ethan's eyes met Lillian's and he saw the judgment there, tempered with a hint of something unexpected, pity. "You knew, didn't you?" she pressed. "I knew parts," he admitted, running a hand over his face. "I didn't want to see the whole picture. But someone higher up made sure the dirtiest work was hidden from view." "Convenient," Lillian shot back. "But it won't be hidden anymore. Not after tonight." Ethan turned to Liam, who had crept closer to the table, his eyes darting over the documents as if searching for a connection. The boy reached out, touching a photograph of a smiling man in a lab coat. It was labeled, "Michael Thorne, Lead Data Analyst." "That's my dad," Liam whispered, his voice quivering. The room fell silent, the magnitude of his statement settling like a stone in their chests. "Your father was the only one brave enough to save the data," Lillian said, her expression softening as she looked at Liam. "He knew that if he could keep the evidence hidden long enough, someone would come for it. He trusted the wrong people once, but he trusted you to finish what he started." Before Ethan could respond, a sharp noise echoed from the stairwell, a metallic click that sent a jolt through the room. Lillian's eyes flashed to the door as she grabbed her handgun and motioned for Ethan to do the same. He hesitated, realizing his was still in his coat, left draped on the chair near the entrance. "Stay behind me," Lillian whispered to Liam as she positioned herself between the boy and the door. Seconds stretched into eternity. The only sound was the relentless drum of rain above them and the muffled thump of footsteps on the stairs. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the doorknob rattled, then twisted slowly. The door burst open and a figure stepped inside. For a moment, confusion and disbelief paralyzed Ethan. The intruder was not the man in the black suit but someone he recognized, a face from board meetings and victory celebrations. It was Graham Porter, Ethan's former business partner and a co-founder of Prescott Industries. "Ethan," Graham said, closing the door behind him with a measured calm. His eyes, shadowed by the low light, swept over the room, lingering on Lillian's outstretched gun and finally settling on Liam. A small, cruel smile crept across his face. "I see you found what I was looking for." "Graham," Ethan said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "You're the one behind this?" Graham's laugh was cold and sharp. "Behind this? No, Ethan, I'm cleaning up the mess you couldn't handle. You think protecting the boy will redeem you? It's too late for that." Lillian's finger twitched on the trigger. "Step away or I'll make sure you don't walk out." Graham raised his hands in mock surrender. "Let's not be rash, Miss Hart. You expose the truth and you'll be hunted too. But there's another way out. Give me the boy and the document and you can all disappear." "No," Liam said, the defiance in his voice surprising everyone. His small hands gripped the edges of the table as he looked up at Graham, eyes blazing. "My dad didn't want them to win." A flicker of surprise crossed Graham's face before it hardened into a sneer. "Your father made the wrong choice just like Prescott here. But this ends now." Before anyone could move, there was a sudden flash of movement as Graham lunged forward. The room exploded into chaos. Lillian fired, the sound deafening in the confined space. Ethan rushed to pull Liam away from the scuffle, his heart hammering as the scene blurred into a frenzy of shouts and the crash of overturned furniture. A second shot echoed, silencing everything but the pounding rain above. Graham staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief as he clutched his chest, blood seeping between his fingers. He dropped to the floor, the echo of the gunfire still ringing in Ethan's ears. Breathless, Ethan looked at Lillian, who stood motionless, the gun still aimed at where Graham had been. Slowly she lowered it, eyes flicking to Ethan and then to Liam. "We have to move," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "They'll know he's down and they'll come looking." Ethan nodded, pulling Liam close as they stepped over Graham's lifeless body. The boy's hand found his and Ethan squeezed it tightly, feeling the weight of a promise made and a battle far from over. The corridor beyond the safe house was narrow and damp, lined with cracked concrete and the occasional sputter of a fluorescent light. The metallic scent of blood still clung to Ethan's nostrils as they navigated their way through the labyrinthine hallways, Lillian leading with brisk, determined steps. Liam's small hand in his felt fragile, but his grip was strong, resolute. "Where are we going now?" Ethan whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "A safer location, one they don't know about," Lillian said, glancing over her shoulder with eyes that had regained their fierce intensity. "We need to make this public before they track us down again. Everything depends on it." Ethan's mind buzzed with the implications. Project Nightfall had been a poisoned wellspring that fed his fortune, but now its dark waters were threatening to drown them all. He knew they would have only one chance to expose the truth before the full force of Prescott Industries' shadow network closed in. Liam's eyes darted around nervously as they emerged from the tunnel into the open. The storm had softened into a steady drizzle, the sky a churning mix of dark blues and grays. The city loomed in the distance, a fortress of lights against the chaos that threatened to spill into its streets. "We're going to an old contact's place," Lillian said, opening the door of an old SUV parked under a crumbling overpass. "He's an independent broadcaster, someone who isn't afraid to take risks." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean someone who can broadcast this without corporate interference?" She nodded. "Exactly. We need the world to see what Project Nightfall truly is." The drive felt interminable, each passing block a countdown to whatever fate awaited them. Liam sat huddled in the back seat, eyes closed as if willing himself into another world. Ethan reached back and squeezed the boy's arm, offering silent reassurance. "How much does the public need to know?" Ethan asked, his voice low. The road wound through an industrial district, where warehouses stood like silent sentinels, their windows dark and watchful. "All of it," Lillian said without hesitation. "Anything less and they'll spin this as an attack on their security measures. We need to show the human cost." Ethan's chest tightened. Images of meetings in sleek air-conditioned boardrooms resurfaced, moments when he'd chosen to turn a blind eye, to feign ignorance when whispers of unethical testing and disappearances reached his ears. How many lives had he indirectly touched with those choices? They turned onto a side street lined with old brick buildings, their facades chipped and marked by years of neglect. Lillian pulled the SUV into a narrow alley and parked behind a heavy metal door marked only by appealing number 46. She knocked in a coded pattern, 3 sharp taps followed by 2 softer ones. A moment later, a slot in the door slid open, revealing a pair of scrutinizing eyes. "Lillian," the man behind the door said, a trace of surprise in his voice. The slot clicked shut, and the sound of bolts being drawn back echoed before the door swung open. The man was lean, with graying hair tied in a ponytail and eyes that seemed accustomed to parsing truth from lies. "Come in." Quickly. They stepped inside, the door clanging shut behind them. The room was a stark contrast to the outside world, filled with high-tech broadcasting equipment, tangled wires, and walls covered in newspaper clippings and screens showing multiple live news feeds. The hum of machinery was a strange comfort, the sense that this place was alive and vigilant. "David, we need to go live," Lillian said, urgency clear in her tone. She handed him the folder containing the damning evidence of Project Nightfall. David's eyes flickered as he thumbed through the pages, the color draining from his face. "Is this what I think it is?" he asked, meeting Ethan's eyes with a mix of awe and horror. "Yes," Ethan said, feeling the weight of his own guilt bear down like an anchor. "And it needs to be shared. Now." David nodded, his fingers moving deftly over a keyboard, the screens around them blinking to life with graphics and text. The room seemed to thrum with an energy that pulled everyone into its current. Ethan turned to Liam, whose eyes were wide but no longer filled with fear. There was a glimmer of understanding there, the realization that this was the moment his father had prepared him for. As David set up the feed, a sudden loud bang on the metal door reverberated through the room. Ethan's heart leapt into his throat. They had been found. Lillian, take them to the back room. Now. David shouted, not pausing in his work. His hands flew across the console, locking the doors electronically and activating additional security protocols. Ethan grabbed Liam and moved with Lillian toward a door that led deeper into the building, slipping inside just as another crash sounded from the main entrance. They found themselves in a smaller room lined with file cabinets and a few chairs. A single monitor displayed the live feed David was preparing. Lillian pressed her ear to the door, listening intently. We need to buy him time. No, Ethan said, a sudden clarity washing over him. He looked at Liam, then back at Lillian. I need to be the one on that broadcast. I started this and I need to finish it. Lillian's eyes searched his for a moment, then she nodded. I'll hold them off. Before Ethan could protest, she opened the door a crack and slipped out. He could hear muffled voices, shouts, and the unmistakable thud of bodies colliding as Lillian confronted whoever had come for them. Ethan sat down at the console in the smaller room and adjusted the camera. He positioned Liam beside him, the boy's small face illuminated by the glow of the screen. With a steadying breath, he pressed go live. The feed began with the Prescott Industries logo and the words "Confession of a Magnate." Ethan's voice, heavy with remorse and determination, broke the silence. My name is Ethan Prescott, and what I'm about to tell you may cost me everything, but it's the truth. Project Nightfall was not just a technological breakthrough, it was a weapon of manipulation, designed to control and silence those who dared to resist. Liam sat beside him, holding the photograph of his father up to the camera, a testament to the lives lost in the shadows of corporate ambition. Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. For too long I chose silence. Tonight that ends. The door behind them shuddered as the lock gave way, the sound of footsteps filling the hall. Ethan met Liam's eyes one last time, a silent promise passing between them. No matter what came next, the truth was out there now. And for the first time, Ethan felt the faintest flicker of redemption. The room trembled with the force of shouts and boots pounding against the floor as Ethan finished his confession. The sound of gunshots echoed from the main room, and the door behind him shook as heavy bodies collided against it. He swallowed hard, his pulse racing as adrenaline surged through him. Beside him, Liam clutched the photograph of his father tightly, the edges crumpling under his small, trembling hands. Liam, Ethan whispered, turning to the boy. No matter what happens, remember your father was a hero. The door burst open with a deafening crash, splinters flying as it gave way to a team of men in tactical gear, faces obscured by black masks. Ethan instinctively shielded Liam, standing between the child and the intruders. The red recording light on the camera blinked steadily, broadcasting every second of the invasion to viewers who had begun tuning in from across the nation, watching with a mix of shock and disbelief. Step away, a voice commanded, cold and authoritative. Ethan didn't move. His eyes locked with the lead operative, recognizing the emblem on the man's shoulder. It was the private security division of Prescott Industries, a division he himself had helped fund 4 emergency interventions. The irony was suffocating. We're live, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Anything you do now they'll see. The operative hesitated, eyes darting to the blinking camera and back to Ethan. Time seemed to stretch and pause, suspended on a knife's edge. Then in the background another sound grew, sirens, distant but approaching rapidly. The police. Someone, maybe even Lillian, had called for help. A bead of sweat trickled down Ethan's temple as he stood his ground. This was the moment. If they made a move against him and Liam now, the world would witness it. And if they didn't, they would lose their chance to silence the truth before it became unstoppable. Finally, the leader gestured sharply, and the men withdrew a step. They lowered their weapons but did not leave, forming a tight line between Ethan and the shattered doorway. Relief coursed through Ethan's veins, chased by a fresh surge of resolve. Lillian stumbled into the room, blood smeared across her sleeve and a bruise darkening her cheek. She locked eyes with Ethan and gave a curt nod, breathing hard. The broadcast, she rasped. It's still going, Ethan said. The police stormed the building moments later, their presence overwhelming as they shouted orders and secured the scene. Ethan felt hands grab him roughly, wrenching his arms behind his back, but he didn't resist. His gaze stayed fixed on Liam, who stood clutching the photograph, his eyes glistening with tears of both fear and hope. You did it, Lillian said as she was led out by another officer, her expression softened by the smallest hint of a smile. Days turned into weeks, and the fallout from Ethan's broadcast rippled through every corner of the country. The confession was replayed on every major news network, dissected and analyzed as more whistleblowers came forward with corroborating evidence. Project Nightfall was exposed as a stain on corporate and political systems alike, sparking protests, resignations, and sweeping investigations. Ethan sat in his prison cell watching a small TV mounted in the corner. His face, haggard and lined with the weight of his sins, appeared on the screen. They replayed the moment when he had shielded Liam and delivered his final words, declaring the truth even as the doors broke open behind him. The footage had become an emblem of both his guilt and redemption. He had lost everything, his freedom, his fortune, his legacy, but for the first time he felt a sense of peace. The boy he had saved, the son of a man who had once been a casualty of ambition, was now safe and surrounded by people who would care for him. And the world knew the truth. A letter arrived one day, delivered through the legal channels. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Thank you for being brave when it mattered most. We'll never forget it, Liam." Ethan closed his eyes, the words warming the coldest parts of his heart. Thank you for joining us on this journey through a story of redemption, courage, and the pursuit of truth. If you enjoyed this series, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more content and share stories that resonate. Don't forget to stay tuned for more captivating stories and discussions. There's always more to uncover. Keep watching, keep sharing, and remember, the truth always finds a way to come to light.